Welcome to Dad's Ultimate Payback. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from, your city, your state, or your country. The Dad's Ultimate Payback community is built on mutual respect, honor, and boundaries, and I want to know exactly where you are standing with us today. Please note that while portions of this story have been shaped with creative elements for storytelling and personal reflection, the hard-earned lessons carried within are entirely real and worth keeping close to your heart. The heavy, bleached white cotton apron struck my chest with a dull thud before falling into my open, calloused hands. Don't you dare step into that grand ballroom and embarrass me in front of Nashville society, my 35-year-old son, Emerson, whispered viciously, glancing over his shoulder like a man hiding a dirty secret. Look at you. If you want to stay in this venue today, tie that apron behind your back and start carrying drink trays from the kitchen. Otherwise, turn your old pickup around and drive back to Knoxville. My name is Howard Ross. I am 69 years old, a retired master carpenter with 45 years of honest sawdust in my blood, widowed for 3 long years. That morning I had woken up at 5 o'clock in the stillness of my empty home, put on the classic navy blue suit my late wife, Rosemary, had bought me for our 40th anniversary and driven 4 hours down Interstate 40 to Brentwood, Tennessee. I came to watch my only son marry his bride, carrying with me a hand-carved black walnut box containing 40 years of his mother's legacy. The wedding venue was a multi-million-dollar historic estate near Belle Meade, flanked by towering white pillars, manicured gardens, and a parking lot packed with luxury German sedans and Italian sports cars. Inside, crystal chandeliers threw glittering light across hundreds of affluent guests dressed in designer tuxedos and imported silk gowns. Yet, 30 seconds after I walked through the front entrance, Emerson, the boy I had taught to hold a framing hammer, the boy whose trade school tuition and commercial contractor licensing I had paid in full, intercepted me at the foyer. He didn't offer a handshake. He didn't embrace me. He dragged me roughly by the elbow into a narrow, dimly lit service hallway behind the catering prep kitchen, threw an apron at my navy lapels, and reduced 35 years of fatherhood to an unpaid banquet shift. I looked down at the rough fabric in my hands. The seams of the navy suit pressed against my shoulders, the exact suit Rosemary had smoothed with her gentle hands in the department store, telling me it was timeless, promising I would wear it to every major milestone of our family's life. She had never imagined her husband would wear it while clearing dirty dessert plates at their only child's wedding. Telling myself a father swallows his pride to keep peace on his son's wedding day, I tied the white strings behind my waist. I took a heavy stainless steel tray from a hurried kitchen coordinator and stepped through the swinging service doors into the grand ballroom. For the next 6 grueling hours, I became an invisible ghost. My feet throbbed inside dress shoes meant for sitting in church pews, not walking miles across polished hardwood floors. Wealthy guests in $5,000 suits reached past my shoulder, plucking champagne flutes from my tray without looking at my face. I was nothing more than walking furniture, an anonymous laborer carrying their dirty glasses away. Around 5 in the afternoon, the banquet captain assigned me to table 1, the VIP head table positioned directly in the center of the hall, framed by cascading white orchids. Sitting at the head of the table was Roland Coleman, 58, a prominent commercial real estate developer in Nashville and the father of the bride. Roland was dressed in a tailored charcoal tuxedo, his silver hair neatly styled, possessing the quiet, natural dignity of a self-made man. I approached with a vintage bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, pouring the wine with steady, practiced precision. Decades of fine woodworking had taught my hands never to shake. "You have remarkable poise, sir," Roland Coleman said warmly, looking up into my eyes with genuine appreciation. "My daughter chose a truly magnificent catering staff. Your service is impeccable." "Thank you, sir," I replied quietly, offering a respectful nod. "It is an honor to serve your table." Standing less than 4 feet behind Roland's chair was Emerson, holding a crystal glass, basking in the glow of his newly acquired social standing. He heard every single word of Roland's compliment. Our eyes met across the table for a fraction of a second. Emerson did not step forward to introduce me. He did not say, "Roland, this is my father, Howard." Instead, Emerson casually turned his back on me, forced a loud laugh at a joke a groomsman made, and walked away into the crowd as if his own father were a complete stranger. 2 hours later, during the dessert course, I was clearing silver forks from a side table when a soft, innocent voice broke through the dining room chatter. "Excuse me, are you the grandpa?" I looked down. Sitting in an oversized velvet chair was a little 7-year-old girl in a pink lace dress, a distant cousin on the bride's side. She tilted her head, her big brown eyes filled with the unfiltered, pure curiosity that only small children possess. "Why are you wearing that white apron?" she asked, pointing a small finger at my tray. "If this is your son's big wedding party, aren't you supposed to be sitting at the front table with the bride and groom?" I knelt down beside her chair. balancing the stack of dessert plates on my knee. "I'm just helping out today, sweetheart, making sure everyone has what they need." 3 steps away, Emerson was chatting with 2 prominent land developers. The moment the little girl's question drifted across the table, I saw his broad shoulders instantly lock up. He stopped speaking mid-sentence. He had heard her loud and clear. The little girl waited for an answer that made sense, looking back and forth between us. Emerson glanced over his shoulder, his eyes meeting mine once again. Then, with deliberate, calculated cowardice, he took a sip of his scotch, let out an exaggerated chuckle, clapped one of the developers on the shoulder, and continued his conversation, choosing to pretend his kneeling father did not exist. By 9:30 that evening, the speeches had ended, and the ballroom began to empty. My lower back burned with deep grinding exhaustion. I untied the stained apron, folded it neatly on a kitchen prep counter, and retrieved the hand-carved black walnut box from beneath the service table. Inside rested Rosemary's handwritten apple pie recipe card, our 40-year silver wedding bands wrapped in tissue, and her final sealed letter. I walked over to the grand gift table near the ballroom exit, where mountains of expensive crystal decanters, luxury boutique bags, and envelopes stuffed with bank checks were stacked. Emerson stood beside the table, laughing with 3 of his groomsmen, loosening his silk bow tie. "Emerson," I said softly, stepping into the circle of young men. "The evening is winding down. I brought this for you and Giselle. Your mother spent her last 3 good months preparing it before she passed. She wanted you to have it today." I extended the dark walnut box toward his chest with both hands. Emerson looked down at the handmade wooden box, then glanced at his wealthy groomsmen, who were watching with amused smirks. His face flushed a dark, furious red, feeling his manufactured country club facade threatened by a rustic wooden box. Instead of accepting his mother's final gift, Emerson violently swung his arm, swatting my hands away with aggressive force. The walnut box flew out of my grip, crashing onto the hardwood floor with a sharp, splintering crack. The polished lid popped open, scattering tissue paper across the floor as our silver wedding bands rolled beneath a velvet drape. "Get this rustic junk out of my face, Dad!" Emerson snapped loudly, his voice carrying across the entire foyer as the groomsmen chuckled under their breath. "Look at this table. People brought Italian espresso machines, $5,000 designer silverware, and corporate investment checks. We don't want your dusty, cheap carpenter scraps from your shed. Take your garage clutter and get the hell out before my in-laws see it." The silence in the foyer was deafening. The groomsmen smirked, turning their backs to check their phones. I did not scream. I did not strike him across the jaw as my working-class hands urged me to do. I slowly knelt on the hard floor, my aged knees cracking in the quiet room. I gathered the scattered tissue paper, retrieved the 2 silver bands from the dust beneath the curtain, and placed them back inside the cracked walnut box. I closed the lid, stood up, and looked my 35-year-old son dead in the eyes. His face was full of sneering arrogance, completely blind to the sacred line he had just crossed. Without saying a single word, I turned, walked out into the cool Tennessee night, and carried my wife's broken box out to my truck. Emerson stood under the warm chandeliers, celebrating his golden life with his wealthy friends. He had no idea that the silent father who had just walked into the dark was about to dismantle the financial foundation of his entire existence. P&2. Q Huliench tu dong 30 Giantin Nenjoitin Mathit Nentinch. The 4-hour drive back along Interstate 40 was wrapped in an unbroken, suffocating silence. The dark highway stretched ahead, slicing through the Cumberland Plateau under a cold, starless October sky. On the passenger seat of my old Ford pickup, wrapped in a worn flannel blanket to keep it from rattling, sat Rosemary's walnut keepsake box. The corner of the lid bore a hairline fracture where it had struck the hardwood floor of the Belmead ballroom. A physical scar born from my son's violent dismissal of his own mother's memory. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't stop for coffee. My lower back burned with a deep, grinding ache, and my feet throbbed inside the dress shoes I had stood in for 6 straight hours while balancing trays of champagne for Nashville's elite. Every few miles, my reflection in the rearview mirror caught the dim dash light. A 69-year-old retired master carpenter, wearing a navy blue suit that still carried the faint crease of an apron tied tightly around the waist. I pulled into the gravel driveway of my modest ranch-style home in Knoxville just past 1 in the morning. The house was pitch black, settling into the quiet autumn night with the heavy, empty stillness that had filled every room since Rosemary's passing 3 years ago. I walked inside, hung the navy suit in the hall closet, and set the cracked walnut box on the edge of the kitchen counter. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. Moving into the small den, I sat down at the battered oak desk I had built 30 years ago with mortise and tenon joints meant to outlast my own lifetime. I flipped open my old laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a pale, cold blue glow across my calloused knuckles and the stack of unopened utility bills on the corner of the desk. I logged into my online banking portal and navigated directly to the sidebar tab I had visited on the first of every month for 3 straight years. Scheduled automatic transfers and recurring autopay. 3 line items appeared on the screen. $1,847 to First National Bank for the Elmwood Ridge mortgage note, $280 in property taxes to the county assessor, and $145 for comprehensive homeowners insurance, totaling $2,272 every single month. I stared at those figures as the cooling fan of the laptop hummed softly in the dark. For 36 consecutive months, 3 full years, I had watched that $2,272 drain out of my fixed pension and modest savings account like clockwork. Over 36 months, that quiet, unacknowledged sacrifice had totaled over $81,792. $81,000. I did the bitter arithmetic in my head. That was the exact money that could have replaced the rotting asphalt shingles on my own roof, which now leaked rainwater into buckets in the attic whenever a heavy storm rolled off the Smokies. It was the money that could have replaced the failing 40-gallon water heater in my utility closet. The one Rosemary had asked me to fix the summer before cancer took her. The one that still groaned, clanked, and seeped rust onto the concrete floor every morning. It was the money that could have rebuilt the slipping transmission on my work truck. Instead, I had deferred my own dignity, lived on canned soup and instant coffee, and worn-out boots with cracked soles so my 35-year-old son could live in a $500,000 suburban Brentwood home and brag to country club investors about his self-made construction firm. A father builds a roof over his boy's head to protect him from the storm. But when the boy grows up, invites his father to the house, and forces him into the service hallway to clear the table scraps, the roof is no longer a shelter. It is an enabler's cage. My hand rested on the mouse. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I hovered the cursor over the first line item, the $1,800 mortgage draft to First National Bank, and clicked the red cancel icon. A dialog box flashed. Are you sure you want to terminate this recurring authorization? This action cannot be reversed automatically. I clicked confirm. I moved the cursor to the county property tax allocation. Click confirm. I moved to the homeowner's insurance premium. Click confirm. 3 clicks. Exactly 30 seconds, the screen refreshed. In place of the 3 recurring charges, a single line of gray text appeared. You currently have no scheduled recurring payments or active autodraft authorizations. I closed the laptop lid, plunged the room back into darkness, and walked to bed. For the first time in 3 years, the weight resting on my chest did not feel like a debt. The next morning, I called the local plumber. 2 days later, a brand new water heater was installed, humming quietly in the clean utility closet. By the following week, I had a roofing crew stripping the rotten shingles off my house and laying fresh charcoal black architectural tiles that sealed the home tight against the coming winter. I bought a solid, comfortable brown leather recliner on sale at the local outlet to replace the 20-year-old armchair whose springs had given out years ago. And then I waited. A week passed, 10 days, 2 weeks, 21 days. My phone sat on the side table beside my new chair, completely silent. Not a single phone call from Emerson. Not a single text message asking if his 69-year-old father had made the 4-hour drive back to Knoxville safely through the night. Not a single word thanking me for hauling wine glasses for 6 hours at his reception, nor an inquiry into why his father had left early with a broken gift box in his hands. Nothing. Just 21 days of hollow, deliberate, arrogant silence. Until day 30, on the morning of November 24th, exactly 1 month after the wedding, I was standing in the bakery aisle of the local Food City grocery store, picking up a loaf of sourdough bread. My pocket buzzed with the sharp vibration of an incoming SMS notification. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. Emerson's contact name was glowing at the top. For a brief, naive second, a quiet part of my paternal heart wondered if this was the moment of realization. Perhaps he had unpacked the wedding gifts, realized the gravity of his cruelty, and was reaching out with a long-overdue apology. I opened the message. There were 4 words. No greeting, no warmth, no humanity. Dad, mortgage is due. I stood motionless under the fluorescent supermarket lights, staring at those 4 words on the glass screen. A woman pushing a grocery cart bumped gently into my shoulder, immediately apologizing with genuine warmth. "Oh, excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry. Didn't see you there." A stranger in a grocery aisle had more natural decency and respect for my presence than the son I had raised for 35 years. I didn't reply immediately. I paid for my groceries, drove home in the morning light, carried the bags inside, unpacked the pantry, made a fresh pot of black coffee, and washed my cup in the sink. Only then, leaning against the kitchen counter where Rosemary's apple pie recipe card sat framed, did I pick up my phone. I typed 6 words in response. "Then I suppose you should pay it." I hit send. Within 45 seconds, my phone erupted into a frantic continuous ring. Emerson calling. I didn't answer. I set the phone face down on the countertop. It rang until it clicked over to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Then came 3 rapid-fire text messages in a row. Dad, pick up the damn phone. This isn't a joke. The bank draft just bounced. Answer me right now. Over the next 72 hours, Emerson called 12 times. I did not pick up once. On the 4th day, the true depth of his monstrous ingratitude arrived via a 2-minute voicemail recorded at midnight. His voice slurred, trembling with aggressive, toxic entitlement. Listen to me, Dad. Emerson's recorded voice screamed through the phone speaker, spitting with venom. First National Bank just slapped our account with an official notice of default and a $500 delinquent penalty fee. They are threatening to start pre-foreclosure proceedings on our home. How could you do this to me? You are the most selfish, vindictive old man on the planet. Are you really going to ruin my credit and destroy my brand new marriage over a damn catering apron? You know I run a high-profile business. You know I have appearances to keep up with Roland's family. You call the bank and wire that $2,200 immediately, or as far as I'm concerned, you don't have a son anymore. The voicemail beeped and cut off. I sat in my new armchair looking out the living room window at Rosemary's bird feeder, swaying gently in the November wind. There was no grief left in my chest. There was no urge to explain, to defend myself, or to offer a compromise. He didn't want a father. He wanted an automated teller machine that accepted abuse without charging a fee. I deleted the voicemail, set the phone back on the side table, and took a slow, deep breath of clean air. The storm was coming down I-40 toward my front porch, and for the first time in 35 years I was completely prepared to let him face the rain alone. Pachin 3. Blancergobantiak Gachten Kusok Sauka Las Vegas Bok. Trend the frost hung thick across the front lawn in Knoxville on Saturday morning, coating the fallen oak leaves in a brittle silver crust. It was exactly 8 o'clock when 3 violent, thunderous knocks rattled the heavy front door on its hinges, vibrating the glass panes of the transom above. I didn't rush. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen table, walked down the hallway, and turned the brass deadbolt. The door was shoved inward before I could fully open it. Emerson barged into the foyer, bringing a blast of freezing mountain air with him. He looked entirely unhinged, his eyes bloodshot and hollow, his jaw covered in 3 days of dark stubble, his designer flannel shirt wrinkled and rumpled as if he had slept in his truck on the shoulder of Interstate 40. He smelled of cheap gas station coffee, stale cigarettes, and raw, frantic panic. You have 30 seconds to fix this, Dad, Emerson barked, pacing across the hardwood floor of the living room without waiting for an invitation. First National Bank sent a formal cure notice to my business address yesterday afternoon. The mortgage payment is 34 days delinquent. Do you know what that does to my contractor surety bonds? The city of Nashville will suspend my commercial building permits if my credit rating drops another 10 points. I want you to log into your computer right now, wire the $2,200, and pay the late fee. I walked into the living room, sat down in my brown leather recliner, and took a slow sip from my mug. The bank draft didn't fail, Emerson, I said, my voice level, low and immovable as an iron anchor. I canceled it, every single cent. Why? Emerson yelled, slamming his open palm against the edge of the dining table so hard the salt and pepper shakers jumped. Because of an apron? Because I asked you to help out for a few hours at my wedding? You're punishing me and jeopardizing my marriage over your fragile ego. Before I could answer, the front doorbell chimed softly through the hallway. Emerson froze mid-stride, his head snapping toward the door in sudden confusion. I stood up, walked past him, and pulled the door open. Standing on the front porch in a heavy wool coat was my daughter-in-law, Giselle. Her face was pale and exhausted, her breath misting in the freezing morning air, but her hazel eyes were razor-sharp, clear, and unyielding. In her left hand she carried a white bakery box tied with red string, in her right a thick, bulging manila folder. Giselle? Emerson stammered, stepping into the hallway, his face draining of color. What are you doing here? You told me you were visiting your sister in Murfreesboro. I took the early morning drive down I-40, Emerson, Giselle said, her voice quiet, steady, and deadly calm. She stepped past him into the warmth of the living room, setting the bakery box on the kitchen counter. The rich, sweet aroma of cinnamon and brown sugar drifted into the air, the unmistakable scent of Rosemary's handwritten cinnamon roll recipe, baked from memory. I brought these for you, Howard, she said softly, offering me a tender, sad nod. Then she turned toward the dining room table, unclasped the manila folder, and looked directly at her husband. And I brought this for you, Emerson. Giselle, whatever this is, we can handle it at home. Emerson pleaded, his arrogance quickly curdling into nervous desperation. This is between me and my father. No, Emerson, Giselle said, her voice cutting through his panic like a circular saw. This is between every lie you've told since the day we met. She pulled the first document from the folder and slapped it flat onto the oak table between us. It was the official, color-coded master seating chart from the Belle Meade wedding coordinator, stamped with the venue's certified logistics seal. Every round table was meticulously mapped, every chair assigned with a printed guest name. Right there at table 2, the premier VIP table placed directly next to the bridal party, was my name, Howard Ross, except my name was not printed in clean black ink anymore. It had been aggressively crossed out with 2 thick strokes of a red felt tip marker, directly beside the red slash. Written in Emerson's unmistakable, sharp architectural handwriting was a single word, remove, beneath my scratched out name, written in the same red ink. Emerson had inserted the name of a prominent Nashville zoning commissioner he had been trying to impress for 6 months. "You told me the venue coordinator made a clerical mistake," Giselle said, her voice trembling with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You told me the fire marshal capped the ballroom capacity and we had to trim the family list. You swore to God your father told you he was too tired to attend and preferred to help behind the scenes. I called the wedding planner on Tuesday, Emerson. She broke down in tears on the phone. She sent me this master chart. You ordered her to cross your own father's name off the guest list 2 weeks before the ceremony because you didn't want a retired carpenter sitting near Nashville city officials." Emerson stared at the red ink on the paper, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, like a fish dragged onto dry sand. The veins in his neck pulsed violently, but not a single syllable of defense could escape his throat. 36 months of mortgage payments, $81,000 of my pension drained. My own leaking roof and broken water heater ignored for 3 years. All of it had been traded away for a red marker stroke and the word remove. "Wait," Giselle said, stepping forward before Emerson could speak. "That's only the beginning." She opened the second compartment of the folder and pulled out a stack of itemized commercial credit card statements spanning the last 90 days, each page covered in bright yellow highlighter marks. "November 7th, Giselle read, her voice ringing through the silent living room like a prosecutor in a courtroom. "Cartier on 5th Avenue in New York. $8,400 for a solid gold Submariner watch. November 15th, $6,000 for an initiation deposit at Riverside Country Club, the very membership you told me you canceled because business was slow." The numbers hung in the room like lead weights. "And this one," Giselle continued, throwing a third statement onto the table with an explosive slap. "October 23rd, the exact Tuesday you called your father sobbing on the phone, claiming you were 48 hours away from losing the house. Round-trip first-class flights to Las Vegas, a luxury suite at the Bellagio, $3,200 in cash advances pulled directly at the casino roulette cages." "You went to Las Vegas?" I asked, the words coming out of my mouth as cold and hollow as an empty tomb. "While I was sitting at this very desk, transferring my grocery money to First National Bank so you wouldn't end up on the street, you were throwing cash on a blackjack table in Nevada? Dad, it was a corporate networking retreat," Emerson stammered, his eyes darting wildly between us as sweat beaded along his hairline. "I was trying to land a commercial framing contract with out-of-state developers. I was going to pay you back every dime once the deal closed. You have to believe me. If you stand with a father who refused to be an ATM for an ungrateful child and finally drew an immovable line in the sand, drop the word stand down in the comments below right now." "You weren't going to pay him back, Emerson," Giselle said, her voice dropping into a register of icy, terrifying finality, "because you were already stealing from him behind his back." She reached to the very bottom of the folder and pulled out a certified 5-page loan closing disclosure bearing the official federal seal of a regional credit union in Chattanooga, dated 3 months prior. She laid the document flat in front of my hands. My eyes scanned the header. It was a $40,000 unsecured personal signature loan. The borrower listed at the top was not Emerson Ross. It was Howard Ross. Attached to the application was a scanned copy of my Social Security card, my date of birth, and my primary bank account routing numbers. Information Emerson had pulled from my private file cabinet in the workshop while I was in the hospital having knee surgery last spring. The electronic signature on the bottom line was a fraudulent, forged electronic authorization executed from Emerson's IP address, $40,000 in high-interest debt, secretly placed on my shoulders to fund his luxury watches, country club deposits, and casino weekends. All while he let me believe he was a struggling young man fighting to keep a roof over his family. The living room went dead, terrifyingly still. The paternal illusion that had blinded me for 35 years did not merely crack. It was completely demolished, pulverized into fine dust. I looked at the man standing across the table in his designer clothes, the boy I had held in my arms, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the boy whose future I had protected with 45 years of physical labor. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a parasitic, calculating criminal who had used his mother's memory as a shield and his father's love as a weapon. I slowly pushed back my chair and stood up to my full 6-foot height. Decades of hoisting heavy oak timber gave my frame an unyielding, immovable presence. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my fist. My voice was as cold and sharp as a fresh chisel blade. "Get out," I said. Emerson blinked, taken aback by the absolute lack of emotion in my face. "Dad, please, listen to me. We can consolidate the loan. If you throw me out, the bank will." I said, "Get the hell out of my house," I repeated, stepping around the table, staring straight through him. "You are not a contractor. You are not a businessman. And as of this second, you are no longer my son. Take your lies, take your debts, and get off my property before I call the Knox County Sheriff to report $40,000 in identity theft." Emerson's face went entirely slack with horror, realizing that the foundation had collapsed and there was no leverage left to pull. He stumbled backward through the front door, nearly tripping over the threshold, and fled to his truck without looking back. Giselle stood in the doorway, tears finally spilling over her cheeks as she looked at me with deep, solemn sorrow. The front door clicked shut. The silence returned to the old house in Knoxville, heavy and absolute. I stood in the middle of the room, looking down at the red ink on the seating chart, knowing that the reckoning had only just begun. PN4. Si earn song geopasman and kioi genek siwa ong bo vov triugov, cold rain of early December, turned the red clay hills of East Tennessee into a gray, sodden mess. In the commercial business district outside Nashville, the collapse of Ross Construction did not happen in slow motion. It hit like an unsupported roof truss giving out under a wet snow load. When First National Bank's cure notice expired without payment, the automated financial tripwires began snapping one after another. Because Emerson had defaulted on his primary commercial lines of credit, the surety bonding agency immediately revoked his contractor's liability backing. Without a valid bond on file with the state licensing board, the city of Nashville issued an emergency stop work order on every active job site carrying the Ross Construction banner. Within 72 hours, the leased office suite on the edge of Brentwood was shuttered. Private repossession haulers backed up to the curb, winching two company-branded diesel utility trucks onto flatbed trailers while subcontractors banged on the locked glass doors, demanding $60,000 in unpaid drywall and framing draws. The landlord posted a bright orange notice of commercial eviction across the front window, declaring all property inside seized under statutory landlord's lien. The personal fallout cut even deeper. That same week, Giselle packed her clothes into 3 suitcases, loaded them into her compact sedan, and moved into a small furnished apartment near Murfreesboro. Before she left the 4-bedroom house on Elmwood Ridge, she walked into a vintage diamond broker in downtown Nashville, unclasped the 2-carat platinum engagement ring Emerson had bought to show off to country club peers, and signed over the title for $11,000 in cash. Every single dollar went directly toward clearing the high-interest personal credit cards Emerson had fraudulently run up under joint household accounts. She left her wedding band on the kitchen counter next to a handwritten legal separation agreement, refusing to carry the burden of a man who treated truth as an optional business expense. 80 miles east, in the quiet booth of Miller's Diner on the outskirts of Knoxville, the smell of black coffee and griddle grease filled the air. It was 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Outside the streaked glass, 18-wheelers roared along the wet bypass, their tires throwing up long curtains of spray. Sitting across from me in the vinyl booth was Jerome Rice, my neighbor of 30 years, his weathered hands wrapped around a thick ceramic mug. Beside him sat Willa Gibson, 48, the senior wealth and asset advisor from my credit union, who had managed my union pension rollover and investment certificates for over a decade. Willa was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen hundreds of families tear themselves apart over real estate defaults and reckless entitlement. "You filed the formal identity theft affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission, Howard," Willa said, her voice steady and reassuring as she slid a certified carbon copy across the table. "The regional credit union in Chattanooga has already frozen that fraudulent $40,000 signature note. Because the electronic signature originated from an unauthorized IP address in Brentwood while you were hospitalized under documented surgical care, your credit file is fully shielded. You are not liable for a single penny of Emerson's debt." "I should have caught it sooner, Willa," I said quietly, staring into the dark reflection of my black coffee. "I gave him $81,000 over 3 years. I let my own water heater rust through and my roof rot so he wouldn't face a 30-day past due notice. I thought I was protecting my boy." Jerome shook his head slowly, his deep brown eyes full of the hard-earned wisdom of a man who had raised 3 daughters through their own trials. "That wasn't protection, Howard," Jerome said, setting his cup down with a soft click. "That was shielding him from gravity. When you spend years catching a grown man every time he jumps off a ledge, you don't teach him to fly. You teach him that jumping doesn't hurt, and the higher he climbs, the harder the concrete feels when you finally step aside." Willa closed her leather portfolio and looked me straight in the eye. "Love that lacks boundaries isn't love, Howard. It's enabling. When you absorb the consequences of someone else's reckless choices, you rob them of the only teacher that actually changes human nature: pain. Emerson didn't fail because you stopped paying his mortgage last month. He failed because you paid it for 3 years straight and gave him permission to never grow up. Her words settled into my chest with the immovable weight of a cured concrete footer. All those years, I had confused sacrifice with fatherhood. I had believed that swallowing humiliation was a virtue. In reality, my silent indulgence had helped construct the very monster that threw a catering apron at my chest. At 4:15 that afternoon, as the winter twilight settled over Knoxville, my cell vibrated against the wooden table. The screen displayed a Middle Tennessee area code and an unfamiliar commercial caller ID. Coleman Real Estate Holdings, Executive Suite. I answered with a steady voice. Howard Ross speaking. Mr. Ross, this is Roland Coleman, the voice on the other end said. It was the same calm, resonant baritone that had complimented my wine service at the wedding in Brentwood. I apologize for calling your personal line without notice, but Giselle gave me your number. Do you have a few minutes to speak man to man? I do, Roland, I replied. Go ahead. A long, heavy breath came through the receiver before Roland spoke again, his tone stripped of all corporate polish, filled with deep, genuine solemnity. Howard, I called to say that I have never felt more sickened in my entire life than I did when my daughter walked into my office yesterday and laid that wedding seating chart on my desk. Roland said, to know that you were standing in that ballroom, wearing the suit your late wife bought you, carrying trays of wine for my guests while your own son crossed your name off table 2 to impress city zoning officials. There are no words for that level of moral cowardice. You didn't know, Roland, I said gently. None of that was on you. That may be true, but honor requires accountability, Roland replied firmly. I spent 40 years building a commercial enterprise in this city on one rule. You never partner with a man who betrays his own foundation. Yesterday morning, Emerson showed up at my headquarters unannounced. He was begging for a $300,000 framing subcontract on my new mixed-use development in Franklin to bail his company out of foreclosure. Roland paused, his voice turning as cold as mountain iron. I had my security escort him off the property, Roland continued, and I placed a personal call to the board of the Middle Tennessee Master Builders Association. I informed every commercial developer, general contractor, and materials supplier in the Nashville corridor that Ross Construction will not receive a single subcontract, a single line of material credit, or a single letter of recommendation from anyone in my network. If Emerson wants to rebuild his life, it will not be through my influence, my money, or my daughter's tears. He is going to learn the value of an honest dollar from the ground up, with his own 2 hands, or he will not survive at all. Thank you, Roland, I whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of respect for a father who understood true character. You raised him right, Howard, Roland added softly before hanging up. He just forgot where he came from. Let's see if the cold weather reminds him. By the following Friday, the winter freeze had settled hard over Middle Tennessee, locking Nashville in a coat of brittle ice. The fall was absolute and complete. Blacklisted by the entire Nashville building trades community, his equipment impounded, his business bank accounts frozen by federal tax liens, and his wife gone, Emerson was stripped down to the bare, unvarnished bone. Late that evening, a contractor friend from Brentwood sent me a photograph taken outside the dark, empty house on Elmwood Ridge. The power had been shut off by the utility company. The luxury German sedan had been towed away by the bank that morning. Standing on the frozen, dead lawn, Emerson had dropped to his knees in the slush, his face buried in his hands, weeping uncontrollably in the dark. The $8,400 gold Cartier watch was still strapped to his wrist, its polished surface catching the pale yellow glow of a distant streetlight. But in the bitter Tennessee cold, surrounded by the ruins of his manufactured life, the expensive timepiece could not buy back a single ounce of his wife's trust, his peers' respect, or the dignity of the father he had discarded behind a kitchen door. He was finally at the very bottom of the hole he had spent 3 years digging, and for the first time in his life, nobody was coming with a shovel to dig him out. Fain 5. Bante Chai San, Treong Truong Moi, and Bura Kermdambach James Jeongs. The bitter December frost settled over Knoxville with an unyielding bite. But inside my modest dining room, the heat was coming from 4 hours of unvarnished, brutal arithmetic. 3 days after hitting rock bottom on the frozen lawn of Elmwood Ridge, Emerson had knocked on my back door carrying a heavy cardboard box. There were no arrogant demands this time, no corporate jargon, no polished excuses. When he set the box on the table with a dull thud, its contents rattled. The solid gold Cartier Submariner watch still in its presentation case, a set of custom carbon fiber Callaway golf clubs with price tags attached, an imported Italian espresso machine still wrapped in protective plastic, and 3 designer leather briefcases. I took all of it to Vintage Consignment and Asset Liquidators in Knoxville this morning, Emerson had said, his voice flat, drained of every drop of swagger. They offered $32,000 cash for the lot. That covers the overdue commercial insurance bond and part of the contractor trade debt. But I don't know how to fix the rest, Dad. I don't know how to budget. I don't know how to live within my means. I didn't offer him a loan. I didn't reach for my checkbook. Instead, I pulled out 2 yellow legal pads, clicked an ink pen, and gestured to the empty chair. Sit down, I told him. Every dollar needs a job. Let's find out what yours were doing. For 4 straight hours. We went line by line through 3 years of personal credit card ledgers, loan statements, and company overhead accounts. We created 3 simple columns: essential, optional, waste. The waste column filled page after page: country club locker fees, 5 different streaming platforms, executive airport parking memberships, dry cleaning delivery subscriptions. By 6 that evening, we had hammered out a Spartan, bare-bones personal budget where every cent went toward mortgage restructuring and debt remediation. When Emerson submitted that certified budget along with the liquidation proceeds to First National Bank, the loan committee approved a probationary 12-month hardship loan modification. If he made 3 consecutive on-time payments starting January 1st through honest labor, they would halt the foreclosure sale and freeze the default penalties. He didn't ask me for a single dollar of that mortgage payment. He took the legal pad, folded it into his back pocket, and walked out to find work with his hands. A week later, on a crisp Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Emerson asked me to meet him at a work site on the quiet rural outskirts of Maryville, Tennessee. I drove south down Highway 129, pulling my pickup behind an old, battered 15-year-old contractor van parked in the gravel driveway of a modest single-story ranch house. The company branding on the doors had been stripped away. In its place was a magnetic sign that simply read, E. Ross, Residential Carpentry and Repairs. I walked through the open front door. The scent of fresh pine sawdust, drywall compound, and clean latex paint instantly brought a familiar ache of memory to my chest. Standing in the small living room was an elderly woman, 74 years old, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan despite a space heater humming in the corner. Kneeling along the baseboard in worn denim jeans and a paint-spattered flannel shirt was Emerson, measuring a corner molding with a wooden folding ruler. Mrs. Ramsey, Emerson said, looking up from the floor. This is my father, Howard. The woman turned, her face softening into a warm, crinkled smile as she extended a firm hand. Alma Ramsey, she said. Mr. Ross, your son has been an absolute godsend to me. My late husband always took care of the house, and since he passed 3 winters ago, the subfloors began to sag, and the drywall was crumbling from a roof leak. 3 commercial contractors from Knoxville quoted me over $12,000, money I simply don't have on a fixed Social Security pension. Your son came out here on a Sunday, inspected the floor joists, and told me the structural timbers were fine, only the top ply needed sistering. He charged me cost on materials and $30 an hour for labor. He refused to let me pay a dime more. I looked down at Emerson. His sleeves were rolled to his forearms, fine wood dust clinging to the hair on his wrists, the soft, manicured hands that had spent 3 years holding crystal champagne flutes and signing fraudulent signature loans were gone. Across his palms and along the joints of his fingers, thick, rough, yellow calluses had begun to form, the unmistakable armor of a working-class tradesman. He does honest work, Mrs. Ramsey, I said softly, my voice catching slightly in my throat. On the drive back along the highway as the winter dusk turned the Great Smoky Mountains into dark purple ridges against the sunset, Emerson drove in silence. That's new, I remarked, gesturing toward his hands on the steering wheel, turning down easy markup. Emerson kept his eyes on the road for a long mile before speaking. I remembered what Mom said when I was 16, Dad. After I got caught lying about sneaking out to a party in high school, she told me through the bedroom door, character isn't measured by how you treat people when everyone is watching. It's measured by how you treat the people who will love you anyway. I spent 3 years treating the people who loved me like disposable ladders. I don't ever want to build on a lie again. The calluses on his palms spoke louder than any sermon. He was finally remembering who he was built to be. 2 weeks before Christmas, a simple white envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a handwritten card in Emerson's clean draftsman script. Dad, would you come to Christmas Eve dinner? I have a seat saved for you at the head of the table where you belong. Love, Emerson. On Christmas Eve, the first heavy snow of the season began dusting the rolling hills of Williamson County. As I pulled into the driveway of Elmwood Ridge at 6 o'clock, the house was transformed. The luxury European sports cars and the manicured pretense were gone. Inside, the marble console tables, the high-end designer sectional, and the glittering chandeliers had been sold to settle trade debts. In their place sat a simple, sturdy 6-foot pine table that Emerson had built himself, surrounded by mismatched wooden chairs. The warmth of the home hit me the moment I stepped across the threshold. The rich, deep aroma of slow-roasted pot roast, roasted root vegetables, and fresh garlic rolls filled the air. Giselle stood by the stove. Flour dusted across her apron. Rosemary's vintage kiss the cook apron, her eyes holding a piece that had been absent for years. 6-year-old Felix, her nephew, was sitting on a braided rug beside a modest, fragrant 5-foot Scotch pine tree decorated with handmade paper ornaments and warm white string lights. Roland Coleman and his wife, Evelyn, arrived 20 minutes later. Roland wore a simple wool sweater, his handshake firm and filled with profound, unspoken respect as he greeted me by the hearth. We sat down together around the crowded pine table. Before the food was served, Emerson stood up. He did not hold a glass of vintage champagne. He held a glass of tap water. His throat moved as he swallowed hard, his eyes scanning the faces around the table before settling squarely on Roland and me. "Before we break bread tonight," Emerson began, his voice trembling with raw, unfiltered emotion, "I owe a public apology to the 2 fathers sitting in this room. Roland, you welcomed me into your family with trust and honor, and I responded by trying to use your wealth and social prestige as a shield for my own cowardice and vanity. I'm sorry for dragging your daughter and your name through my wreckage." Roland nodded slowly, his jaw tight, offering a solemn nod of acceptance. Then Emerson turned directly to me, tears welling in his eyes. "And Dad," Emerson choked out, the tears breaking over his lashes, "you gave 45 years of backbreaking labor to build a foundation under my feet. You gave me $80,000 of your retirement while your own roof leaked in the rain. And on the most important day of my life, when you drove 4 hours wearing Mom's suit, I shoved a catering apron into your chest and crossed your name off the table because I was too small of a man to stand in the light of an honest carpenter. I cannot undo that day. I cannot give you back those 6 hours behind the kitchen door. But I can make sure the record reflects the truth." Emerson reached beneath the sideboard and brought out a large, heavy object wrapped in brown butcher paper and tied with jute twine. He walked around the table and placed it gently in my hands. "Open it, Dad," he whispered. My rough fingers untied the twine and tore away the paper. Reading in a handcrafted walnut frame was a high-resolution, professionally restored photograph of the wedding altar at Belle Meade. In the original raw footage, I had been an anonymous, blurred figure in the background service corridor, carrying a stainless steel tray of champagne flutes with a white apron tied around my waist. In this restored portrait, the background had been cleared away. The apron was gone. Standing tall and proud on the riser, right beside the bride and groom at the center of the family portrait, was me, Howard Ross, wearing Rosemary's timeless navy blue suit, my shoulders broad, my smile real, standing in the place of highest honor. Beneath the glass, engraved into a small brass plate at the bottom of the frame, were 6 Howard Ross, the station of US all. I ran my thumb across the brass plate, my eyes blurring as 35 years of sorrow, sacrifice, and silent endurance washed away into the quiet, snow-covered night. "It's not how it happened that day, Dad." Emerson wept softly, gripping my shoulder with a calloused, honest hand. "But it is the only way it will ever be remembered in this house. Fin 6 Biux Thu D NMH Trong Hopts Oaks Cho and Sean TNH2." The dinner plates were cleared, but nobody moved from the long pine table. The living room was filled with the rich, comforting fragrance of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls. Rosemary's original recipe, pulled hot from the oven by Giselle, the sweet aroma of butter, brown sugar, and toasted spice warming the cold December air. Outside the double windows, large white flakes of snow drifted silently down against the dark Tennessee pines, wrapping the house in a soft, unbroken stillness. 6-year-old Felix sat quietly on the edge of the hearth rug, holding a wooden toy truck Emerson had carved for him, while Roland Coleman and his wife Evelyn leaned back in their chairs, their eyes resting on the center of the table with quiet reverence. I stood up, walked into the hallway closet where my coat hung, and retrieved the dark black walnut box. I carried it back to the table with both hands. The wood felt heavy, cool, and solid under my palms. The small hairline fracture on the outer corner, the scar from the night it was swatted away onto the hardwood floor of the Belle Meade ballroom, was still there. But beneath the warm yellow light of the dining room chandelier, the polished grain glowed with a deep, timeless luster. I set the box squarely in front of Emerson. "Your mother spent the last 3 months of her life preparing this for you, Emerson," I said softly, my voice carrying across the silent room. "She made me swear on a hospice bed that I wouldn't open it until you were truly ready. That night in Nashville, you weren't ready. Neither was I. But sitting at this table tonight, I know she'd want you to open it now." Emerson stared at the dark walnut grain. His hands, now rough, weathered, and lined with fresh yellow calluses from weeks on the job site, trembled visibly as he reached out. With slow, reverent care, he lifted the heavy hinged lid. The room held its breath. Sitting right on top of the velvet lining was Rosemary's original handwritten recipe card for her Thanksgiving apple pie, every measurement penned in her neat, patient cursive on a yellowed index card. Beneath it lay a small velvet pouch. Emerson pulled the drawstring open and tilted it into his palm. Too simple. Classic silver wedding bands rolled out into the light. The very rings Rosemary and I had worn through 40 years of pouring foundations, raising a family, and weathering every storm life threw at our door. And beneath the rings rested the heavy ivory envelope, sealed with red wax, bearing 3 lines written in Rosemary's unmistakable script. For Emerson and Giselle, not until he is ready, you will know when. Break the seal, son, I whispered. Emerson's thumbs shook as he slid his fingernail under the wax, snapping the seal with a soft, crisp pop. He pulled out 3 folded sheets of heavy linen paper. As his eyes scanned the opening lines, his chest heaved, and hot tears spilled over his eyelashes, dripping onto the wooden tabletop. Read it, Emerson, Giselle said gently from across the table, her own eyes glistening with tears as she rested her hand over his. Read it out loud for all of us. Emerson swallowed the hard lump in his throat, took a ragged breath, and began to read, his voice cracking with profound, raw emotion. My dearest Emerson, if your father has placed this letter in your hands, it means my time on this earth has passed, and you have finally reached the age and the humility to understand what a mother could never fully teach you when you were a boy. Your father and I did not build our 40-year life on wealth, status, or the approval of strangers. We built it on 2 things that cost nothing to possess but require everything to keep: honesty and labor. We worked with our hands because honest sweat leaves no room for arrogance. We told the truth because a lie always demands a second mortgage on your soul. If you are reading this, you may have lost your way along the path. That is the tragedy of ambitious young men. They look at the roof of the house and forget who poured the concrete in the mud beneath their boots. If you have stumbled, remember this truth. Character is not an inheritance. It is not handed down through your bloodline or bought in an upscale boutique. Character is a daily choice. Every single day of your life, your father's first instinct will be to carry you through the storm. He will want to take your burdens onto his own back, pay your debts with his own blood, and shield you from the consequences of your own mistakes. Do not let him. If you fall, Emerson, do not ask your father to carry you. Ask him to teach you how to walk home. Emerson's voice shattered completely. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking violently as uncontrollable, cleansing sobs tore through his chest. She knew Emerson wept, his tears soaking through the linen pages. She knew 3 years ago what I would do to you, and she was trying to save me from myself. Oh God, Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood up, walked around the table, and wrapped my arms tightly around my son's shoulders. He clung to my flannel shirt like a drowning man pulling himself onto solid ground. It was the first real, unburdened embrace we had shared in over a decade. Across the table, Roland Coleman wiped a tear from his cheek, while Giselle looked on with a radiant, peaceful smile, knowing her husband had finally found his true foundation. When we finally stepped back, I reached deep into the bottom compartment of the walnut box, beneath the velvet lining where a hidden wooden false floor rested. I lifted the divider and pulled out 2 heavy steel and brass objects that had been my constant companions for 45 years. My vintage solid brass Stanley folding rule, its markings worn smooth by thousands of measurements, and my 16-ounce Vaughan steel framing hammer, its hickory handle darkened and polished by decades of my own sweat. I laid both tools across Emerson's open palms. For 45 years, Emerson, these 2 tools built the roof over your head, paid for your education, and protected this family, I said, looking him dead in the eye with all the authority of a master builder. I am passing this hammer to you tonight not so you can build grand, hollow castles to impress people who don't care about your soul. I am giving it to you so you can drive the nails straight, work with honesty, and hammer shut every single crack in your dignity as a man. Emerson gripped the smooth hickory handle, his knuckles tightening around the wood. I won't let you down again, Dad. I swear on Mom's memory. I looked around that warm room, watching Felix smile, watching Roland nod in solemn brotherhood, watching my son hold the tools of an honest tradesman. The bitter chill of the Belmead ballroom, the shame of the white catering apron, the $80,000 mortgage debt, all of it had dissolved like frost in the morning sun. That is the true, unvarnished meaning of a father's ultimate justice. True family justice is not born from blind revenge, public humiliation, or destroying your own flesh and blood. It is born from having the courage to step back, draw an immovable line in the sand, and refuse to enable the destruction of the person you love. The most powerful thing a father can ever do is not carry a son who refuses to walk. It is letting him hit the ground until he finds the strength to stand on his own 2 feet. Love without boundaries is poison, but love that demands the truth will rebuild any foundation on earth. Never mistake a father's silence for weakness. And never forget, when you build on truth, no storm will ever tear your house down. Thank you for standing with us until the very end on Dad's Ultimate Payback. If Howard's journey and the sacred lesson of the walnut box resonated with your heart tonight, please take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share this story with a father, a son, or a family that needs to hear the power of boundaries and forgiveness. Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on tonight's story. Every single comment strengthens the Dad's Ultimate Payback community across the world. Until next time, protect your peace, stand firm in your values, and take care of those who truly honor your foundation.